The primary living area of our homestead is surrounded by a fence. And this is the fence. And it's a super important piece of infrastructure on our homestead for really one reason, is to keep potentially dangerous wild animals out, mostly bears. But I also want to keep deer out because then I keep them out of the garden. And so this fence is 10 feet tall. It's a high tensile fence, and there's a number of gates around the property, around the whole surrounding area. So it encompasses 8 acres. It's 2,400 feet long, and this is it. The guy who did it did a fantastic job. But something that I have to do really only once or twice a year is do a real sweep of the whole perimeter of the fence. So especially on the season changes, mostly it's going into winter where it's most important. But this fence has 2 electrical lines on it. And so again, our biggest threats here are just bears for the most part. And I want to keep deer out of the garden. Everything else, other small animals can get through it easily. But how do you prevent bears from climbing the fence? And so our solution here is 2 very high voltage. They're not live right now. I turn it off when I do maintenance. Unless I want to find a voltage drop somewhere, then I would keep it on and use a voltage reader. But so this one goes along, it's about 2 feet from the top, maybe 18 inches. I'm sure it varies actually because the terrain is so up and down. And then one on the bottom, which is about 18 inches off the bottom. And the whole idea is if an animal tries to come in here to try to climb, it will at some point rub up against this wire. So if it was a smaller animal, maybe a bobcat or a mountain lion, we get those up here, cougars, it'll try to do a tree and jump over, and it potentially could get over. So it's always a risk. And one thing I'm doing now before going into winter is checking the fence area for potential compromisations in some way or another. It could be a branch or a stick leaning on the electrical wire that's grounding it out, and so then the fence isn't working. Or it could be an obstacle like what I see right here. I see some shrub or a branch that's fallen over, and it might be disrupting or grounding out the wire. So we're going to have to go look at that. But also what I'm going to have to do before winter is come in with the line trimmer and just hack all this stuff down about a few feet out from the fence, just so that it's clean, and as the snow falls, it lands clean and it isn't pushing branches or things into the wire, because that's what will happen. So it's good to mow it essentially. So I'll be bringing the BCS out here soon enough, and a line trimmer, and just mowing basically both sides of the fence all the way down. But yeah, I mean, I'm coming along here right now. I'm just doing a scout of this to basically see if there's bigger work ahead. So I'm just kind of at this point of the year, just walking around it, solving little problems that can be solved easily with some hand tools. And then otherwise, just making a list of things that are going to have to be done to really do this. And I imagine this will take a day or 2 of work. But having said that, I just begun, and I'm just looking now. So we will see. So when I'm walking along here and I'll see things like this, I'll just use my hand tools. I've got some basic gardening stuff. I got some pruners here. Always have a Leatherman with me. Pencil in case I need to mark something on a post. A knife just in case. And I've got a little hand saw here. And I'll just come along and do kind of the weak links first, so that by the time I come through with the machinery, I don't have to worry about doing hand trimming or things like that. I would do that stuff now, and then I'll come in after with the machine and just go for it. And so there might be a call in some of these spots too for a chainsaw. And so that's what I'll do as I do this fence line and kind of go through this. I'll make notes. I have my phone with me on airplane mode, of course, and I'll just make notes as I go, make little videos or things like that. So as I go along and inspect this fence area, I'm looking at a few things. I'm looking first for any disruptions in the wires. So anything that's grounding out one of the wires. I got this, for example, is almost touching it, and it might not ground it out because it is pretty high voltage, but I would just come in and just snip those things. And then if I see a cluster, I might tackle it, or I might just go, okay, well, the mower can get that later. And what I might do is just work and just cut the stuff on the inside of the wire here, so that after, when I'm coming with the mower, it's pretty clean and easy and don't have to do a lot of back and forth. So I'm looking for wire disruptions above and below. And then I'm also looking for compromising in the fence. So was an animal trying to dig down at a low spot like this or here? I mean, this is only 1.5 inches off the ground, but you get my point. And so that's what I'm looking for. And then I'm looking for potential hazards of something that's leaning in that looks like when the snow comes, it'll just be the first thing to go and fall. And so I'll cut things down like that. And yeah, just kind of keeping a general look around the area and seeing if there's anything that could compromise the fence in any way. You know, things too, looking above and seeing, because when the snow comes, we get so much debris breaks down. And that's actually what's a really cool thing about living in a forest environment, is you see how soil is made. It's especially with snow, because snow takes all this stuff down and it just really rots down on the ground in the melt, and it just keeps bringing debris down. And so you have always this forest floor that's really amazing. And one thing I'm excited to do, on a totally other subject, one thing I'm excited to do on my property over time is continue to mulch and expedite the decomposition of the material that's coming down, expedite it by getting it on the soil and broken down. And this is why I like having my BCS mower, my brush mower, because I can do that. I can just keep mulching and mulching and mulching and mulching on the ground. And what does that do to mitigate fire? You know, bringing more moisture in the soil, taking all that dry carbon and getting it down on the ground and wet and decomposing it's a big job, but it's, you know, when you have a lot of land, it's, hey, well, there's something to do forever. Here's a neat area where the fence is that long or that high off the ground. And so a small animal, a baby bear, could probably crawl through there easily. So one thing I can do here too is a couple things. One, I could just get some more of the fencing, cut a piece, pin it to the ground, connect it to this. Or another thing we can do is we can take pieces of wire and hang them off this, and they just drape down, and it's enough that they'll brush themselves against it and they'll get stung, and they won't want to do it again, or they might try it a couple times and then quit from there. So that's kind of other things that I'm looking at when I go along this fence. Here's a really cool example of what I just explained, but better actually. So this is what the guy who built the fence did in areas where the fence gets low, like right here, the bottom of the fence line is about 1 foot off the ground. And so he's cut another large piece of fencing and he's bent it. He's pushed it to the ground and then he's bent it. You can see it coming up here. He's bent it so it'd be really hard to push your way under there. And so that's another way of fixing little spots like this in the bottom of a fence. So I'm coming along through this area, and again, I'm on the outside of the fence right now. I'm still on my property though. We have 40 acres, so we've just enclosed the 8 primary acres that we spend 99.9% of our time in. And I'm walking along. Now I've come into this grass area. Now I'm gonna go, okay, yeah, there's lots of disruption here. Could be a potential problem, so I'm gonna come in here with the mower or the line trimmer and just whack that down. These are some sweet areas that the guy who built the fence did, and I asked him to do this, and he'd done it before. It's a thing you do, to utilize some of the trees. I didn't want to just cut down a bunch of trees, especially if they're good ones. We did cut down crappy ones, but this is a good one. And so what he's done is he's taken 2x4 along the tree where the tension of the fence is, and then he basically just nails it in or screws it in there, and then basically uses it as a secured post. Because if he had wanted to make this turn, otherwise he would have had to tie it off and secure it in some other places so that it didn't just constantly push over. All right, this is a great thing to show with this fence and how it works, because there's a lot going on in this one area. So we've got our high tensile lines, the two coming along, and as they approach a gate, they screw down and they're secured to the post. Then that wire goes into a shielded wire to bridge that area, and then it's tied to the gate, and then so on and so forth. It carries on, and so it dead ends, but the feed of the wire continues under the gate. But everything else is still live. So that's all live. I've got to cover this with sand. We don't use this gate often at all, but I'll eventually cover that with sand. But that's how it really works. The only thing we're actually missing from here is one of the ground posts. And that's, as I go along this fence, I'm also checking the ground posts, and we'll go and find one and I'll show you. One cool benefit to having this fence is it is a place where garbage can stop. So obviously some construction garbage that's blown around, and so now I can come and collect it, and it's not blowing around the greater area, so I can at least contain my mess a little bit. But here's another great example of how when the fence bends and takes a direction, how he'll buttress that. And because we're so rocky here, he used a lot of steel, which is great, because then he could just auger it in, and then he would just use a bit of quickcrete and concrete the fence post in there, and then tie that off as a square, and it's strong. So here's how it's grounded out. Some wire, some coated wire comes off. That's the main unit, and I'll show that in a second. It comes off, and he could have done one or two things. He could have just taken a post, a ground post, and put it in the ground. But here we had to use a ground post for the fence on the rock, so ground it right there. So he's got it grounded out on that one as well. And then coming along here is the main unit that comes. I've got it off right now, like I said, but this wire comes from my Quonset just through there. So it runs through the bush, and it comes here. And this is what it is. A Gallagher 1500. And there's a little thing here that'll pulse. When it's not completing its voltage, it'll just flash red. And when it's completing its cycle or whatever, it'll go up here. And it's, I've been shocked by it once, and it was really rough, really rough. So I can't imagine small animals, little bears or deer, are gonna wanna feel that either. So this is another ground post, which is basically just a piece of fence tubing hammered into the ground, and wire is tied to the fence and to the ground post. So essentially what it's doing is grounding the fence. Now the reason we want to ground the fence is so that if a bear or something else is trying to climb up, it will, if it's touching the wire, it will also be grounded because it'll touch the fence. So the fence is grounded, and then that way it'll get zapped, you know, in kind of whatever scenario it takes to climb the fence. So that's the point of these grounding posts here. It's just really simple. Everything is just connected to the metal into the ground. Well, that is my fence. Folks, if you guys liked the video, smash the like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and I'll see you in the next one. Check out my site, fromthefield.tv. It's where I post all my vlogs and the vast majority of all my content. All right, guys, we'll see you in the next one.